Hi, I'm Hannah, and I'm a sourdough microbaker based in Fort Myers, Florida. I've been running an in-home sourdough microbakery called Crusty Cravings for over a year now. The majority of that time, I had been baking all of my sourdough bread and baked goods out of my home electric oven, and it wasn't until February of this year that I was laid off from my full-time job and decided I needed to go all in on my business and continue to scale. And the only way to do that is buying bread ovens. I bought my Pico Plus bread ovens from Chanley. ISCA is the distributor in the US, and the rest is history. I have been able to cut my bake times down by a fraction of the time. I'm able to bake 10 full-size loaves in these ovens at a time if I'm using both at the same time. They are around 875 grams each, and if I made them a little bit smaller, I could definitely do 6 at a time in each oven. I know a lot of people who do 750 gram loaves and they're able to fit 6 very comfortably in each oven. I can do 16 mini loaves at a time in these, and they are boule shaped and they're 450 grams each. And I'm able to do 2 pans of cinnamon rolls that are huge industrial sized pans. The nice thing about the Pico Plus ovens is they fit a standard size pan. So it is the perfect width for these large size pans that you can find at any kind of food equipment store or restaurant depot. And they're super affordable as well. They're a good material, so none of my bottoms burn. But I'm making something that I know the bottoms are gonna get a little toasty because the stones are too hot. I use these oven racks, which doubles as a cooling rack. And I'm able to put the pan on top of this just to create a little barrier in between the really, really hot stones and my baking sheet. I'm able to do 16 scones at a time in each oven. Able to bake around 18 cookies in each oven at a time. And I'm going to experiment with English muffins and a variety of other things. I can do focaccia, you name it. You can bake just about anything in these bread ovens. You do have to adjust the temperature and find the sweet spot, so to speak, for your oven and environment, but they have been super easy to learn. And over the course of the last 2 months, I have been able to continue to improve my baking process and find that method, the time and temperatures that work for me in my environment. I think one of the coolest features about the Pico Plus bread ovens is that they have a top and bottom control. So if you feel like your baked goods are getting a little too toasty, you can turn down the bottom temperature, which is what I do for my bread. I find that the bottoms toast a little too soon if the temperature is too hot, and so I prefer to do a hotter temperature on the top with a lower temperature on the bottom. The nice thing about these bread ovens is that they heat up in no time at all. Most bread ovens on the market take around an hour and a half to 2 hours to fully heat up and have the stones come to the right temperature for optimal baking. But for the Pico Plus ovens, it takes anywhere from 25 minutes to 45 minutes to heat up to that desired temperature. And I'm only having to wait about 10 to 15 minutes in between loads to reload the oven and bake another round of loaves. So it is very efficient compared to the other options on the market, which is what I personally love about it. I also love that there are 2 different units, and you can even add a third if you want to continue to scale your production and grow your business. I started with 2, and I can bake at 2 different temperatures since they are separate ovens and separate units. So I'm able to do cookies on the top, bread on the bottom, bread on the top, scones on the bottom, whatever works for my business. And being a baker who thrives on variety, having 2 separate units to bake 2 separate things on 2 separate temperatures is amazing. And I love that I made this decision. Today we're going to walk through my process for baking artisan loaves in these ovens. I let it warm up for about 45 minutes before my first load. I do 250 on the top, 220 on the bottom to preheat, and I will show you how I do that in my process, the time and the temperatures, the steam that I'm injecting, etc., etc. My loaves are anywhere from 70 to 76% hydration, depending on the recipe that I'm dealing with and the type of flour I'm dealing with. And that can sometimes change the process just slightly, or how much steam you need to inject in your oven. I haven't noticed a significant difference, and I always use 150 milliliters of water. I would just change the time and the temperatures whenever I'm using something that is lower hydration versus a loaf that is super high hydrated and expands more rapidly and opens up a little bit more. If I'm using a lower hydration and freshly milled flour, it may take a little bit longer with steam to fully open up and expand versus those high hydration doughs. Today we're going to walk through my process, and I'm going to show you step by step what I do, how I load my oven, the time, the temperatures, how I rotate, and ultimately the result. There are really only 4 non-negotiable tools that I need in order to bake in my bread ovens. The first is these oven mats or oven liners. I deal with a ton of messy inclusions, and it can ruin my stones quite easily if cheese or any kind of liquid or garlic or other things get on them. So I'm using this to line my stones so that I don't ruin them, and it also prevents burnt bottoms. And then I'm also using this bread lawn from Wire Monkey, which is my personal favorite. It's the goose lawn. And I have this peel that makes it easy to load my oven. This came from ISCA and their accessories package, and I highly recommend it. It's the perfect size fit for the oven, and you're able to launch your bread in and out of the oven very cleanly and rotate your loaves very easily. And lastly, my Lannon gloves. These are the extra long Lannon gloves and the size 9. I used to burn myself on my forearms when getting in and out of the oven, and these definitely help. I will say that if you are handling Dutch ovens or a baking steel that's 500 degrees Fahrenheit, these would not be my preferred gloves because they do get pretty hot even with this heat protection. I would use something that could go past 500 Fahrenheit. These are more ideal if you're handling hot bread coming out of the oven, if you have a peel that's allowing you to get in and out of the oven, and mainly protecting my forearms from getting super burnt. You can see where I used to not wear these. I have so many scars here and here from getting in and out of the oven. So these definitely help and protect me, but again, I feel like they get a little too hot if you're handling Dutch ovens or open baking on a baking steel and you're having to touch the baking steel. So after I bring in all 10 loaves, I line these. So after I bring in all 10 loaves, I line them in the way that I want them to be on the mat. And this is the way they'll be in the oven. If you were to do 6 at a time, many people line them like this, diagonal. And again, I could do that. I have done that, but I find that they expand a little too much and sometimes touch each other if they are over 850 grams. If they are a little bit smaller sized, it's a lot easier to do 6 at a time. This is how you would line it if you were going to do 6 loaves at a time, diagonal. This is what works best for people. If you're doing over 800 gram loaves, sometimes they can touch in certain spots if your loaves are really explosive. So that's why I find that doing 5 gives me better results and more consistent results and more even browning, and they are spaced out a little bit further, so I don't even have to worry about them touching. This is how I personally set up my loaves on my baking mat before putting them into the oven, so that I know where they'll be on the mat, and then I just flip them over. This part I like to move kind of fast and get them in the oven as fast as I can. I am not a fancy scorer when it comes to bulk baking. If I'm making 1 or 2 loaves for the family, I'll do fun scores. But when it comes to bulk baking, whatever is going to get me consistent results and faster is what I personally go with. For scoring, I will either do 1 down the side and a score like this, or I will do 2 down the sides and 1 score down the middle, like so. After I have scored my loaves and they're ready to go in the oven, I just take my So you make sure that the vent is closed, which is up. And I insert 150 milliliters of water. So I immediately drop the top temp down to 210, the bottom temp down to 210, and I'm going to leave steam in there trapped for about 15 minutes. And after 15 minutes, I'm gonna go ahead and vent the steam, but I'm not gonna open the door and I'm not gonna rotate the loaves. And then I bump the temp up, let them brown for a little bit, and then I rotate them. Because the back of the oven runs hotter than the front of the oven, and so rotating them is going to help them evenly brown. Both decks are loaded, and now I'm setting a timer for 15 minutes to bake on 210 top, 210 bottom for 15 minutes. So we'll check on them in 15 minutes, and like I said, I'm going to vent the steam for about 5 minutes before I rotate them, and I bump up the temperature to allow the crust to harden. What I was finding is that many people recommend to leave your loaves in there for 20 minutes with steam and then rotate. And what I was finding is that the loaves were still very soft and shiny on the outside. And when I went to rotate them, they were not hard enough and would deflate a bit and get dimples on the side. And so leaving them in there for 5 more minutes with steam venting while the temperature is a little warmer is helping them harden before I rotate them. The only negative about these ovens is there's no light bulb, which also means there's no light bulb to change when it breaks or goes out. There's no light bulb to shatter, but you do have to hold up a flashlight to the oven door to be able to see inside. But this is only after a couple minutes and they're already looking really nice. Been 15 minutes, and so all I'm doing during this step is opening this vent to allow the steam to slow release, and I am bumping up the top temperature to 230. The bottom stays at about 200, and I'm going to bake them for another 5 minutes before I actually rotate them. In order to get that soft, airy, fluffy, and tender crumb inside without it feeling like it's wet or a little heavy, you have to leave it in your oven for a little bit longer at somewhat of a neutral temperature to allow your loaves to expand properly, to allow them to seal properly, but you want the steam to start escaping from the crust so that it doesn't feel wet inside. Of course, this has nothing to do with proofing. So if you are under fermenting or over fermenting, you're going to have issues with the crumb regardless of steam. But what I'm wanting is that the steam does start releasing at this point so that the inside of the bread is soft and tender versus wet. The only way to describe it is to show you pictures or images of what my bread looked like before I started releasing steam at 15 minutes. And there's a huge difference between now and then, and how soft and airy and fluffy it feels versus it feeling like it still had water inside. Your bread releases more steam once it comes out of the oven, and that's why they always tell you to let it cool for 2 hours before you cut it. But even when my bread was cooling for 2 hours and I cut it open, it still felt a little heavy and like not a lot of steam was escaping. And so that's why I started doing this at 15 minutes versus leaving it in there for longer. Some people do steam for 30 minutes, and I feel like that's way too long, especially for my bread and how hydrated it is. So after I release steam, I let it sit for 5 minutes before opening the door and rotating the loaves. And so all you see here is that I had turned it, and I'm waiting 5 minutes, and then we're gonna go ahead and rotate. Top has now been in for another 5 minutes with the higher temperature, so now it is time to rotate. This is to prevent uneven browning and to prevent the back from cooking a lot faster than the front. Pretty simple process. I just turn the peel completely around. That's it. It takes around another 20 to 22 minutes-ish for them to fully bake through and to evenly brown. But I watch it and make sure that they're evenly browning and are the desired golden brown. You do have to keep a little bit of an eye on it for the last like 4 or 5 minutes because every loaf and every batch is going to be slightly different depending on proofing. And it really just comes down to that last 5-minute window on how done you want them. It is time to rotate the bottom. It's been another 22 minutes and my loaves are looking pretty done at this point. I have customers that don't prefer their loaves to be extremely dark, so I try to get a nice golden crust without it getting too toasty. This one here is the preferred color of a lot of my customers, and it's fully baked, but it's just not as dark as some people like it. And my hot honey loaf always gets done a lot faster and gets more golden. I absolutely love how my everything bagel loaf turns out. Another hot honey, a classic. If you ever want to be just extra sure that your loaf is fully cooked, you can double check the temperature, and if it reaches between 200 to 210, it's fully baked. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this was helpful for new Pico users as well as existing. And if you like this kind of content, please like and subscribe and share, and go ahead and drop a comment asking any questions about the Pico Plus, and I will try my best to answer them or get you somebody from ISCA who can answer the question, or Chanley directly if you're in another country. But I really appreciate it, and we'll see you next time.